Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ben Keyser with Applied Flow Technology. Hope that you are all having a very fine week. I want to thank each and every one of you for your time and joining us today for our webinar on 10 Waterhammer modeling tips that you wish you knew sooner. And this webinar is being recorded as usual. And for those of you who are listening in live today, I included a PDF of my presentation for you. And then if you're listening into the recording, please feel free to email me at benkeiser@aft.com. That's BENKEISER@aft.com. And I'll be happy to send you the presentation if you're listening to the recording. Anyway, before I start jumping into the content today, I want to show some areas on our website really quick. And I'm doing this webinar today with not the greatest assumption in the world that each of you has some sort of familiarity with Waterhammer and AFT Impulse. Okay, so if you have never used Impulse before, or if you're brand new to doing Waterhammer work, this webinar will be beneficial, but there are some other resources that would be really enlightening for you as well. And I want to show you where you can find some of those, because this is not an introductory webinar. I'm going to be going through some more advanced flow modeling techniques. I'm not going to spend time going over the basics today. So if you want to learn the basics, one of the best places to go to our website at aft.com is under the Learning Center, and then video tutorials. We have several video tutorials on our page that are really useful, and the best way to find videos that you might be looking for is to use the filters here. So I'm going to filter by product, AFT Impulse, and then I'm going to filter by language and by units. I'm going to do everything in English units for myself. And so there's a few video tutorials that I want to highlight that are really important. One of them is the quick start video tutorial. This one right here. This is the very first thing that you should watch. If you have never touched AFT Impulse before, the quick start video tutorial is going to be the best place to start, because it will go over a good general overview of the interface, and that way you can learn the ins and outs of how to use the software. Next, there are some other videos that are really useful. If I scroll down in this list a little bit more, it's these 5 videos right here. The first one that you're going to want to watch is the video on pipe sectioning. Pipe sectioning is something I'm going to be talking about today a pretty decent amount, and then we're going to be doing another webinar coming up in a couple of months to go even deeper into what pipe sectioning is. But this is the second video that you should watch right after the quick start video. So after the quick start video, watch the pipe sectioning video, and then after that, the 4 videos right here on transients will illustrate to you how you can model different types of, I forgot to select or circle a video. I will show you how to select or how to specify different types of transients in AFT Impulse. There's 4 different ways: time transients, single event transients, dual event cyclic, and dual event sequential. And each of those gives a good example of each of those types of transients that you can use. And it's intended to watch those 4 videos in succession. So I would not recommend just jumping straight to the dual event sequential. Make sure you watch them in this order, and that way you won't miss any important content, because they're designed to build on top of each other. Another handful of useful videos would be the new feature videos that we published for AFT Impulse version 6. They're the videos on graphing. So there's basic graphing, using the graph results toolbar, and then is a two-part video on advanced graphing. And so I'm going to go over a lot of those capabilities today because that's one of the really important tips that you need to know how to do with AFT Impulse in order to effectively analyze your results is use the graphing capabilities. And those videos would be a good refresher down the road to help you see the different things that you can do. All right, so those are several video tutorials that are really useful and informative. If you go back up to the Learning Center under webinars, this is where you find all of our upcoming webinars that are in the future. But for the webinars in the past, you can find those in the library. You just go to this page and you would fill out the form. And once you fill out the form, you can gain access to the library. And then on the Impulse page, this is where you can find lots of useful videos. The introductory webinar is really important because in this webinar, we go through a good introduction to not only AFT Impulse, but also what Waterhammer is. So that's another good place to start. And then you can find several other webinars that we have recorded on this page as well. All of them are incredibly useful and helpful webinars for getting a much better understanding of Waterhammer. So that's where you can find all of that information. All right, moving that aside here. So we all know that Waterhammer is really bad and can cause a lot of problems, pipe ruptures, cavitation, pipe collapse, definitely something that you want to avoid. And why is Waterhammer modeling tricky? Well, it can be a little bit difficult because the transient mass and momentum balance equations, they're not as simple and easy and straightforward as steady state. You know, if you're using AFT Fathom for doing steady state hydraulics in your piping system, it's pretty well intuitive and easy to do because everyone has a pretty good understanding of simple steady state flow from fluid mechanics. But when you start throwing things into the transient ball game, that's where it definitely takes it up a whole other notch. Another issue is that Waterhammer is one of those topics that's not really covered in your undergraduate fluids classes. They probably don't even spend any time on it at all for the most part. And so it's something that's a bit foreign to engineers because they don't touch on it in the university setting. So the time that you start to get familiar with what Waterhammer is when you're thrown into a project where you have to analyze Waterhammer, and it's very easy to evaluate things in the wrong way, okay? And as I've mentioned before in previous webinars, evaluating Waterhammer is very much of an art as it is a science. That's because there's no single black box around the answer. You know, here's your flow. You know, here's what the pressure is. It all depends on what's going on in the situation. So there's a lot of gray areas that can be really difficult to understand. And that's also especially the case if you have cavitation in your system. And so, you know, if you are not sure how to effectively use a software tool to evaluate your results, then it's difficult to interpret your results correctly. And another issue is that the Waterhammer events happen so quickly, where those waves are passing through the system so fast, your naked eye just simply can't catch it. Okay, things are going way too quickly on the order of milliseconds. And even for your devices that can measure, you know, things changing over time, they have to have a very, very fine resolution. Even, you know, there's so many things that can happen in even 10 or 100 milliseconds. And so you need to be able to really capture what's going on in a very short period of time. Lastly, this is a concept that I really want to stress. As I mentioned with steady state hydraulics, people tend to understand that pretty well. And so if you're using AFT Fathom or AFT Aero for steady state systems, it's really easy to jump into those software tools to start, playing with different features to be able to figure out what you need to do. And so we do have tons of materials and the documentation for the software, as well as on our website, that will help you learn the software effectively. But for steady state stuff, it's pretty easy to learn it on your own by just poking around. But with Impulse for Waterhammer, that is just not the case. And so even if you know the interface from previous experience with AFT Fathom or AFT Arrow, Impulse is a whole different ball game. And I want to stress that it's really important that you do take the time to get the proper training on how to use Impulse properly, because it is a lot easier to misuse Impulse than it is Fathom or Arrow, especially when it comes to interpreting your results and making the right decisions. So make sure that you either come to our training seminars, or you can buy a Flow Expert package where we can go into more detail with you on your systems. And then in the least, make sure you work through the quick start guides and the tutorial examples. So here's what we're going to talk about today. Tips on how to use AFT Impulse to better understand Waterhammer. And so if you know how to use these 10 different tips and features I'm going to be talking about, it's going to take you much, much further, and you'll be able to have a much better grasp on how to understand Waterhammer. So it's not really Waterhammer tips per se, because that's just mathematical calculations. It's really about the tips on using the software for evaluating what's going on in your Waterhammer situations. First thing we're going to talk about, pipe sectioning. Very, very important. And again, be sure to watch those videos. Pipe sectioning is the biggest issue that we see commonly. Oftentimes, we will see people that send in their model files that have every single component modeled explicitly, every area change, every elbow, every valve, every single fitting, orifice plates, they have included as physical junctions. And that causes many, many short pipes to appear in your system that are just totally unnecessary for modeling in order to get an accurate picture of what's going on in a Waterhammer sense. So we're going to talk about effective pipe sectioning today. We're also going to talk about how to include those fittings and losses within a single pipe, or same thing with elevation changes. You do not have to model individual pipes and a whole bunch of extra junctions on your workspaces to get an accurate picture. You can lump all of that information into a single pipe to simplify your model and still get very solid results. So we'll see that today. We'll talk about what it means to save output for interior pipe computation stations, not just the inlet and outlet, and why you would want to do that. We'll talk about how to create and use design alerts, how to create and use groups. Groups are really helpful for grouping pipes or junctions together in certain ways. And one of the best ways for creating groups is with various continuous flow paths. The reason why is because if you want to compare what's happening in different flow paths, using groups will allow you to do that. Graphing, very, very important to learn and understand all the different graphing tools of AFT Impulse, because as I mentioned, the capabilities that we came out with the previous version completely revolutionized the way that you'll evaluate your results. And so having a solid handle on how to graph the results in Impulse is key, because really with everything that you can do in Impulse, you're not going to have to take things into Excel anymore. You can do everything that you need in Impulse, and it's going to make it so much easier to understand your results, because graphing is everything. You're not going to be spending very much time looking at data in tables. I'm going to show you the visual report animation, and that's a new feature that came out with Impulse 7, and it's a really helpful way to be able to help you conceptually understand what's going on in your system. So we'll see that. We'll talk about variable resistance. Sometimes there are warning messages that you will see that tell you to use variable resistance. I'm going to explain what that is. And then last but not least, we'll talk about T's, using simple T's in your model versus detailed T's. Do you really need to use detailed T's? Is that necessary? So those are the things that we're going to talk about today. Oh, and finally, the scenario manager and duplicate special. The scenario manager and duplicate special are incredibly useful tools, not only for allowing you to be able to model all of your different operating cases within a single model file, but they also allow you to easily do a sensitivity analysis. So let's say that you're not sure how fast you should close your valve. Well, if you use either duplicate special or the scenario manager, you can easily try different closure mechanisms. Half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds. And that way you can compare the results a lot easier and be able to know which method that you need to go with. So I'll show you both of those tools today. All right, first thing is to talk about pipe sectioning. So I wanted to demonstrate this slide first because pipe sectioning is where we are taking every pipe in the system and we are breaking them up into bits. And the reason why the pipes need to be broken up into bits is for the transient pressure and flow calculations. I'm going to talk about that in the next couple of slides. So each of the pipe sections are going to be equivalent in length. They're all going to be the same length. So this is an example of a single pipe right here, and we have two different terminologies. We have computation stations and then pipe sections. So the computation stations, this is where we are doing the mathematical calculations. So we have station 0, that's the inlet of a pipe. And then we have the first station, second station, third station, fourth, etc. And this station right here represents the outlet of the pipe. So this particular pipe has 6 computation stations. Really, it's actually 7 computation stations when you include the inlet. So that's what computation station means, is it is a mathematical point at a certain length in the pipe where we are doing the method of characteristic calculations. Pipe sections, these are they are between the boundaries of computation stations. So this is section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4. And so you can think of those as being between the borders of the computation stations. So a section has an actual volume associated with it. It's simply the diameter and the length of that given section. And so that particular section has a volume associated with it. And then this is the numbering scheme that we use for pipe sectioning. So here we have 2 pipes in this particular system right here. And we're modeling several sections. So this pipe 1, that has 4 sections, section 1, 2, section 3, and section 4. And then pipe 2 has 3 sections, section 1, 2, and 3. Now with that, we have a numbering scheme. This is pipe 1, station 0, pipe 1, station 1, pipe 1, station 2, pipe 1, station 3, etc. So if you want to know what the pressure and the flow rate is at a certain station, this is what you're going to be looking at right here, is a particular mathematical point and what station it is going to be at. And that way you can monitor what's going on inside the pipe. There's other solution methods out there called like the wave characteristic methods, and those are useful for really, really large systems that have thousands and thousands and thousands of branching locations. And that's really good for helping the system solve faster. But the downfall of that wave characteristic method is it's only calculating what's going on at a branch point as an example. It's ignoring what's happening inside the pipe itself. So yes, it's important to know what's going on at the inlet of the pipe and the out of the pipe. But if you have a pipe going over a hill, then this is going to be an important station. You are going to want to know what's going on there. And so that's where we have the results at the computation stations. So this concept is going to come into play more throughout the webinar. So really quick, these are the fundamental mathematical equations that are being used to solve the system. It's the transient mass balance and transient momentum balance equations. And we are using the method of characteristics to solve for the transient new pressure and flow rate at every area throughout your system. And so when you do all the calculus involved, you can calculate what the new pressure is at another time step, and that pressure is simply going to be based upon the pressure at the previous time step, which that would be my previous time step at the immediate upstream station and the immediate downstream station. So this is the beautiful thing for the method of characteristics, is you can solve this equation explicitly to calculate what the pressure is here at this pipe station, or what the pressure is at this station, or at this station, or at this particular station. This is the grid that represents a single pipe. Inlet, outlet. So here's the inlet of the pipe, here's the outlet of the pipe. And because you can solve explicitly, you do not have to, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't have to manually iterate. There's no iteration involved. So simply adding more stations just to get more accuracy, it doesn't give you more accuracy. It just gives you more resolution as to what's going on. And so it's not necessary to do that. So the key thing here is to understand how the pipes are broken up into different sections and what is being computed at each section. So this is where I want to calculate the pressure and the flow rate at this particular pipe station at this given time step. These next couple of slides, I'm not going to really spend too much time on. Communication time is a really important concept to understand. How the pipes are sectioned is really important to take into account and know how we're doing that. And so the time step is not just something that you specify. It's calculated based upon the pipe wave speed and the length. And so your maximum time step is derived from the shortest pipe in your system. So your shortest pipe length divided by its wave speed is going to calculate your maximum time step for you. And the reason why we use the shortest pipe is so that it can ensure that there's enough resolution to allow the waves to be able to pass through your system and to see what's going on. And it's going to start by assuming one section in the controlling pipe. So if we use one section in the controlling pipe, we can calculate our time step. And then once we know our time step, all the rest of the pipes can be sectioned. So we know the length of each pipe, the wave speed, and the time step. We can calculate how many sections are going to be in that pipe. Bottom line is, the more sections and more computation stations that you have, the longer your runtime is going to be. As an example, if we have a long pipeline here where from a reservoir, I have a 10-foot long pipe where I've modeled a pressure gauge, and then downstream of that, I have a 10,000-foot long pipe. Well, based upon this system, the shortest pipe is going to be 10 feet long. When we assume one section in that controlling 10-foot long pipe, we're going to have 1,000 sections in the longer pipe. Here's the key thing to remember is that if you double the number of sections in your controlling pipe, it's going to jack up your runtime by a factor of 4. because your time step needs to be halved for the communication time. So if you were to use 1 foot, then that's going to put 10,000 computation stations in your long pipe, and your system is going to run for a long time. So the key moral of the story is try to make your short pipes a little bit longer, okay? If you have a, 10,000 or a 20,000 foot long pipe and you're trying to model every little pipe connection from a, let's say that you have a valve and then a reducer and then a pump, and so you've got some 6-inch long pipes in there. Just neglect those or make them longer, because that's going to skew your sectioning and it's going to make your model run much, much longer, which is just completely unnecessary. So having a solid understanding of sectioning and how that works is really important, because it is the biggest impact on your runtime. So by default, when we go to section the pipes and break them up into bits, we're going to start by searching up to 5 sections in the controlling pipe. So it finds the controlling pipe, which in this particular model is pipe number 33. It's 10 feet long. And so it uses 1 section in that pipe, 2 sections, 3, 4, 5, etc. Now, for each given number of sections in that controlling pipe, in this particular case, I'm using 2 sections. As you can see, it's going to lead to a runtime that's 4 times longer. And what it's doing is it's taking the original wave speed and it's modifying the wave speed, because we have to have a whole number of sections. You can't have 2.7 sections in a single pipe. It needs to be a whole number. So in order to get a whole number, we need to modify something, and that's going to be the wave speed. I'm going to talk about that in more detail in an upcoming webinar. But for right now, the wave speed is what's being adjusted, and there is a certain variance or error value associated with changing the wave speed in each pipe. So the results that you're looking at in this particular row here is the maximum variance of the wave speed that you see for that number of sections. And it also tells you the time step. Now here's the thing, is it's standard practice to allow up to plus or minus 15% in the error and wave speed to still have accurate model. And the reason for that is because if I go back a few slides here and we take a look at the wave speed equation, this is the wave speed equation right here. As you can see, we've got a lot of complicated terms. Bulk modulus of elasticity of the, I can't remember, that's the fluid of the pipe. We have bulk modulus of elasticity of the fluid. We have the Poisson ratio. We have constraints that are important. And so there's a lot of terms in there that each carries their own uncertainties. And so allowing up to 15% in that variance in wave speed is appropriate. And it does not mean that you're allowing up to 15% error into the model itself. That's not it. I'm going to talk about that in another webinar. So for more information on pipe sectioning, be sure to watch this video tutorial. You can read another blog that I wrote, which I'm going to touch on again later. And you should make sure that you register for the You Should Combine Your Pipes webinar. That's going to be coming up on November 6th, 2019. And I'm going to go into a lot more detail about pipe sectioning in that webinar. So the key thing is to use an appropriate number of sections. Now, let's talk about what I'm mentioning here when people feel the need to model every single fitting explicitly. You know, elbow, filter, here's another elbow, an elbow, here's another elbow, another elbow. And with the way that I drew the model, they're also at different elevations, 40 feet, 20 feet, 0 feet. And then all of these are in a horizontal plane. So many times users might feel that they need to include every single fitting in their pipeline in order to get an accurate picture. And That's just not true. You can dramatically simplify this system and still maintain a high level of accuracy. And so with that, are all of these junction fittings really necessary? No, they're not. So let me go ahead and open up a model really quick here. Give me just one moment. So here's my starting point. And actually, this is a blog I wrote that is in this previous slide right here. So if you read this blog, you should combine your pipes. This is exactly what I'm talking about in this particular slide, with including your fittings into the pipes themselves. So in this model, I have modeled all of these junctions. So this is actually a model that I brought in from Fathom. Okay, so in Fathom, I actually had elbow junctions all throughout the model. Well, we don't have elbow junctions in Impulse because people would be tempted to use them, and they do not cause any transient behavior to happen because you can't change the position of an elbow over time. It's just going to stay there. So it's best to lump in your elbows as additional fittings and losses into a single pipe itself. So when you import a model from Fathom into Impulse, it's going to look at those parts of your system. It's going to try and include them in the pipes. And this is where I chose not to combine the pipes. And so I kept the elbow locations as junctions. And what it did was it converted them to use the general component junction, but it uses the same K factor that Fathom calculated. So I still have the same level of detail that I brought from Fathom. So this is the overly detailed model where I have all of the junctions listed explicitly as well as the elevations. Now let me open up the combined piping system. In the combined piping system, it's a lot more simplified. So this little red ampersand, that's a symbol that you'll see in our new versions, and it means that you have additional fittings and losses on those pipes. So what I did was I combined the pipes so that this whole run is now a single pipe object. So I went from several pipes down to 5 pipes, where this used to be 3 individual pipes where I had 2 different elbows in here. Let me zoom to fit. There we go. Where I used to have 2 different elbow junctions, now I don't have any elbow junctions. I've lumped everything into this pipe, and it's a single pipe rather than 3. And so this is a good way of simplifying your model and still maintaining a high level of complexity. So if I open up this pipe as an example here, this is the fittings and losses tab. So what it did was it figured out the total K factor for the elbow plus the filter plus this elbow, and it lumped that in as an additional K factor for an additional pressure loss in that pipe. Now you can add more fittings if you want. So if you were to click on specify fittings and losses, this is where you can throw in all of your different elbows, valves, check valves, orifice plates, area changes, etc. into a single pipe. So when you fill out this form, all you need to do is just put in however many of these types of components that there are, and it'll calculate the total K factor, and it'll lump that into the pipe as such. Now, one thing I want to bring up here is when you click on any of those different rows, you can see how the picture here changes. If you double click on that picture, it'll tell you the reference that we're using for that particular loss model. So the K factor for this type of elbow, that comes from the Crane technical paper. That's a little tip there. So when you lump in your fittings as an additional K factor, it's still going to give you the same overall pressure loss in that pipeline, okay? The only thing that you're losing is if you were to use explicit junctions, you would see step changes where all of those fittings and minor losses would be. So when you lump everything in, it's still going to give you the overall pressure loss, but you're just going to miss out on those step changes. But that's okay because you're trying to focus on how are those pressure waves passing through your system. So this is a really good way of simplifying your model to really avoid long run times and still maintain accuracy. The other part to this is intermediate elevations. As you all know, whenever you specify a junction on the workspace, which would be a reservoir or a valve or a T, or previous when I had elbow junctions here, one of the common pieces of information you have to specify is elevation. And when you specify the elevation, that's how the pipes pick up the elevation change. However, if you go into the pipe model on the optional tab, there's this handy feature called use intermediate pipe elevations. This is where you can specify a point-to-point elevation change with the length. That way, you can include the overall elevation changes within a single pipe. So let's say that you're in the pipeline industry and your pipe is traversing over a whole bunch of mountainous hills. This is where you can use the intermediate pipe elevation feature to just throw in a whole bunch of data, and that way Impulse will correctly account for all of your elevation changes. And based upon the computation stations from the sectioning, that's how you can monitor how the pressure is changing at the high points. So if you know where those stations are, then that's where you can see what those lower pressures would be. So using the intermediate pipe elevation option is really helpful for you. So those are 3 important tips that will really make it a good game changer for you. Now, I've referenced some more blogs in that area here. I thought I did. Well, the way that I did was if you read this particular blog right here, it actually refers to 2 other blogs. It refers to a blog that I wrote explicitly on including intermediate elevation changes, which you can also find on our tips and tricks page. So if you don't know where our tips and tricks page is for our blogs, go to our website, aft.com, or the Learning Center, tips and tricks. And then if you do a keyword search for intermediate elevations, you'll find that blog right here. And this is a really good blog to read to show you how you can use that feature effectively. All right. Next thing is to talk about saving interior pipe station output. So let me go ahead and open up another model here. All right. So as I mentioned, pipe sectioning is the biggest impact on model runtime. There are some other factors as well, but pipe sectioning is the biggest. The other factors are in the transient control window. Now, those are just parts of the checklist that you need to complete before you can run your model. So if you access the status light to open up the checklist, here's where you need to section your pipes. And this is where you specify your transient control. Well, what is transient control? That's where you specify how long you're going to run your simulation for. So in this particular model, I'm running the simulation for 10 seconds. This is a pump startup scenario, and I want to see what happens after the pump starts to see if I have any problems. So one of the things that can have an impact on your model runtime is the amount of output that you're saving to the output file. That's where we store all the results, is in a separate output file outside the impulse file. So here you see that the model has an extension IMP. That's your model file. The output file has the extension OUT. So if you are looking at those OUT files, those are the output files that contain all your results. So here we have a 10-second run time, and in 10 seconds we know our time step. We're going to have 2,300 time steps. Now we take those 2,300 time steps for every pipe in the model, and we're going to save the output for every time step to the output file. That's going to lead to a potentially long runtime if you're saving every single time step. Again, it's not the biggest factor though, sectioning is, but here's another area where it plays a factor in your model runtime. That's the pipe station output tab. So by default, what Impulse is doing, if you were to build a model from scratch, this is what Impulse is going to do. It's only going to save the results for the inlet and outlet of every single pipe in your model, and those are the results that are going to be saved in your output file. Now, it still will know what the maximum pressure is in every pipe, even if your maximum pressure is not at the inlet or the outlet, and you can still plot all that. But here's the thing. If you're only saving the inlet and outlet results for the pipes, if you have a particular pipe, like, let me move this out of the way here. Let's say that this particular pipe was really long and it has a high point in the system. Well, if you're only saving the inlet and outlet pipe results, you're not going to be able to know what's going on at the high point. This is where it's really important to include additional pipe stations. So here's an easy way to do this, is to click on all, and that will check the boxes for all of these pipes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this drop-down menu to all stations. So what I want to do is I want to save all of the intermediate computation stations, like I talked about earlier, to the output file. Once I change the drop-down to all stations, I can click on the button next to it, change selected pipes to all stations, and bam, there we go. So when I do this, it's going to save all of the interior pipe stations to my output file. That will have an impact on your file size and your runtime, but it is worth it to deal with a little bit longer of a runtime. Here's why. When I click OK, I go to run my model. When you save your interior pipe stations, it allows you to do two different types of graphs. If I go to the graph results window, the transient pipe, this is where you might want to see intermediate station results for different pipes. So if I look at this particular pipe right here, pipe number 10, well, pipe 10 is this pipe right here. That pipe is 1,200 feet long. That's a really long pipe. I want to know what's going on inside there. And so if you go to the transient pipe tab, this is where you can plot results of a particular pipe station over time. So here I might want to add some stations to that list. So I'm going to add station 0, station 3, 8, 15, 21, 30, and we'll just call it good. And then I'm going to click on generate. So this is really helpful because I can plot my results for all of these interior pipe stations all together. And if you're not saving the results for those interior pipe stations, then you're not going to be able to get this resolution. You're not going to be able to plot that. So make sure you save those interior stations. That way you can plot that detail. Here's the other reason why you'll want to save the interior pipe stations, is because if you go to the profile tab, and I'm going to go ahead and plot a flow path. Okay. Give me a second here. All right, so let's say that I want to plot this flow path here. This particular valve does not open right away. This valve is only going to open once my system pressure has built up. So when the pressure at this location hits 45 psi, that's when this valve is going to open, okay? So I want to graph that flow path. So if I select it on the workspace, I can go to the Profile tab, and after they're selected on the workspace, when you click on the workspace button, it will check the boxes for you. And the reason why I want to save the interior pipe stations is to use this option right here. I want to animate the results using the output file. Here's why this is really useful, is because if I'm plotting the animation and I run it, as you can see right here, the pump is starting up. Okay, so when that pump starts up, you can see how the system pressure is beginning to rise over time, but the downstream flow path doesn't start until I hit my pressure downstream, which it just did. I'm using the wrong units. Let me replot this. So PSIG. So here, 45 PSIG is when this flow path is going to open up and start changing. So this is why I want to use the output file by saving the interior results, is because when things happen in your animations, they're going to happen very, very quickly. And it's really hard to spot everything that's going on when these transients are passing through so fast. So what you might want to do before, when the results are going crazy, is to pause your animation. When you pause your animation, what you can then do is use this tool right here to back up a couple of time steps. So if I click on this button over and over, you can see how it's backing up time step by time step. That way I can go to a certain time frame when things are going crazy, and I can back up to see what was happening just before those points. So the beauty of saving your interior pipe stations is not only so you can plot those stations separately, but it's so that you can also use the output file so that you can pause the animation and use this tool to back up. If you're using the solver, your model can run faster initially, but you will not be able to pause and back up over time. So when you're using the solver option, you're viewing the model running live. And so that way you wouldn't have to have a larger output file up front. So you could maybe do all and then set them to inlet and outlet. But the problem is, if you're not including all the stations, this will not be available. You'll have to use the solver. And so that's where you're not going to have the ability to pause it and work your way backwards a few time steps. You can only go forwards in time. And so this is where I recommend using the output file. Just deal with a little bit longer of a runtime up front by saving all stations. Simply check the box, change the drop down to all stations, and then change the pipes, and bam. Deal with the longer runtime up front, and it'll make it so much easier for you to graph your results to better understand what's going on after you have your results. All right, what are we on next? Oops, I didn't mean to open up my email. All right, so we talked about saving the interior pipe stations. Let's talk about design alerts. Let me skip to another model here. Design alerts are a tool that you can use that can flag your attention to various minimum or maximum values that are happening in your system. So here I have a system where I have used the duplicate special feature to take my original system and then basically just copy and paste it 3 additional times. But rather than doing Control C, Control V, I did a duplicate special. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So the reason why I did a duplicate special is because I don't know the valve closure time that I need to use. This system is modeling ammonia with a really, really high vapor pressure. So it's very likely that the system will cavitate. So I'm going to try different valve closures of half a second, a 1 second closure, and a 2 second closure. And my goal is to figure out a closure time period that will eliminate the cavitation. Now, not only do I want to make sure that it eliminates the cavitation, I also have a design requirement where my pressures have to stay between 200 psi and 300 psi. So the first job is to eliminate cavitation with an appropriate valve closure, and then the second job is to keep my pressures between this range. So using design alerts helps you quickly see if what you're trying to do is going to work or not. So if you go to Tools and then Design Alerts, this is where you can create your design alert. So you click on Create New Design Alert, give your design alert a name, call it Max Pressure as an example. You can allocate your design alerts to either pipes or junctions, and then you'd pick which parameter you're wanting to deal with. So here I'm going to use, stagnation pressure, and my maximum pressure has to be 300 psi. And then this is where you would allocate which particular pipes that this design alert is going to be applicable for. Now I've already done that. So I have my 300 psia maximum pressure design alert. It applies to all the pipes on the workspace. And then I have my minimum pressure design alert, where all my pipes have to be also above 200 psia minimum. So I've got 2 design alerts. Once you create your design alerts, it allows you to do a couple things. A, Impulse will yell at you if you have any design alert violations. So as you can see here in this list, I've already got big ready warning messages telling me that my maximum design alerts have been violated, my minimum design alerts have been violated, and it tells you which particular pipe and pipe station that it's occurring at. Additionally, it will highlight those violations in the output table. Now, because of this, I know that already my half-second, 1-second systems are cavitating because I have non-zero vapor volumes. The 2-second valve closure is the only one that does not cavitate. So that doesn't have any vapor volumes there, but it's still exceeding those limits. So if I go to my graph results and I select these 3 pipes here on the workspace, and I go to my graph results and I click workspace, that way it checks those pipes. What I can do is an animation, and I'm going to click on this box right here for DA. That stands for Design Alert. And this is going to be stagnation pressure. And this will cross plot my animation with my design alerts. So this is really helpful because now when I animate the results, this is where the valve is. We can see exactly when those design alerts get exceeded. So I play it, the valve is going to start closing. The valve is all the way closed. And look at that. It is staying, or it is going way outside those boundaries all the time. And that's a real problem, and I can't have that in my system. Now, what I did is in this system, I did a different type of valve closure. I did what's known as the 80-20 rule. Watch one of our other webinars, and you'll be able to learn more about this valve closure later. But essentially, this does a really good job of mitigating surge pressures. When you close it almost all the way really fast, and then the rest of the way over a longer period of time. It still closes it in a 2-second closure, but it's not linear anymore. So we're going to see how this dampens things out. So if I select this flow path here and go back to my graph results, I can say none and then workspace, and I can replot things. So this looks very similar to what it did before, but here's what happens. I'm going to speed up the animation a little bit. Well, see, that went really quick. That's why I want to make sure that I'm using the output file by saving the interior pipe stations to the output file so that I can pause my animation and then move backwards. So here I can move backwards time step by time step. Now this goes really quick, so I'm going to slow this down actually. So I'm going to make my speed go a little bit slower. So look at this. This is when it first crosses that line for 300 psia. Now if I go forward one time step at a time, you can see that this is the only section of piping where that design alert is violated. But then the other question is, how long does it stay above that maximum value? Well, not very long. It drops right back down immediately, and then it just barely touches it. And so if I continue to go forward in my animation, it actually never crosses that boundary ever again. And so here the valve is just about to be closed all the way. And now that the valve is fully closed, you can see that the animation is staying very well between your design alerts. So the design alert tool is very useful for being able to plot your maximum allowable operating pressures, etc. All right. Now, let's talk about groups. Using groups is a good way to be able to plot multiple flow paths together. So I'm going to jump back to that other model really quick here. All right, so I have my model. I'm going to select a flow path on the workspace. And after I select it on the workspace, I'm going to go to Edit, and then Groups, and then Create. Give it a name. I'm going to call this Supply to Tank 1. And this brings up the Group Manager. This shows me all the pipes and junctions that are selected for that particular group. And I'm going to stick with all that and click OK. Now I'm going to do a second group. I'm going to do the bottom flow path now. So I click on Edit again and Create. And I'll call this Supply to Tank 2. So now I have two groups. This is why this is really, really useful, is because when I do my when I run my model, I want to compare the animation results for those two different flow paths. So if I go to my graph results window, here's where you would plot multiple paths using groups. So first, I would click on Profile, and then I'm going to click on None. And you see where it says Plot Single Path? This is where I'm going to click on that drop-down menu, and I'm going to use Plot Multiple Paths using Groups instead. So here, I'm going to check the boxes for my two groups, and then I'm going to do an animation. And you can compare both paths at the same time. So when I play my animation here, my pump starts up. All of that is happening way down here. The blue line, that's the path to tank 2, which is the bottom tank. That's a much, much longer pipeline. So you can see how that pressure wave propagates down as the pump has come up to speed, and then it's going to reflect itself back. So this is where it's really helpful to use groups. So there's not very much to it. Again, all you do, select things on the workspace, such as a flow path, go to edit, go down to groups, and then click on create, give it a name, and there you go. And then that's where you can plot multiple paths using groups. Now, I know that we're at the top of the hour, and I've got a few more topics that I want to go into, and really, everything's kind of interrelated. So I've already been showing graphing, but now I'm going to show graphing in a little bit more detail with a few different things that you can do. And so there's just a few more handful of topics that I'm going to talk about. And again, since this webinar is being recorded, if you need to head out of the webinar, that's totally okay. When you get the link to the recording of the webinar, simply pick it back up and then you can watch the rest, because I'm going to keep going here. This is really important information. And then if you're able to stay on the line, and I'll keep going. So let's go ahead and finish this out. Back to graphing. If you've never touched Impulse version 6 or Impulse version 7 before, there is a really useful tool that will give you just 1 second here. Hang on. Excuse me. There's a really useful tool that will walk you through all the different graphs, because honestly, there's a lot to it. The graphing tools are incredibly powerful. You can do transient pipe graphs, junction graphs, profile. There's a lot there. And so if you're just stumbling into this, what button do you click on? This guy right here, the one that says, what would you like to do? Let me circle that a little bit better. So if you click on what would you like to do, this pulls up what's called our graph guide. This is outstanding because the graph guide will walk you through how to set up the different types of graphs that you might want to plot. So you can do quick and simple. This tells you what a transient pipe graph is or a transient junction graph. So an example is maybe this is the pressure response at a valve, but we're looking at the outlet of a particular pipe here. So that's what a transient pipe graph is. Transient junction graph looks at results for junctions. So this is where you watch the speed of the pump change over time. And then this is a profile plot. So what you would do is just click on any of these, and then what it will do is it'll take you to the appropriate tab, and it'll walk you through step by step of what you need to accomplish so that you can create some plots. Same if I do a transient junction graph. As you can see, it goes to the other tab instead. So it tells me to select my appropriate junctions, a parameter, and then click generate. So you just go through step by step following the yellow brick road. If I want to do a profile plot, first thing is to select a flow path, either using groups or a single flow path. So I do groups, I can do that, select my parameter and click on generate. So that's doing quick and simple graphs. But there's some really fancy and useful stuff that you can do. And so that's advanced graphing. So this is where you can do advanced types of transient pipe graphs. So this is where I would plot maybe the pressure and the flow rate at a pipe station where the pressure and the flow is stacked on top of each other. Or you can do a secondary y-axis. And there's two types of secondary y-axes that you can do, and these explain the differences between them. Similarly, if I do my profile graph, you can do some really useful stuff here. This is what changes the game for doing your Waterhammer analysis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my graph results window, and I'm going to do a couple of them for you. So I'm going to create a new folder called Webinar Graphs. The Graph List Manager is where you can organize and file all of your different types of graphs in a really useful fashion. You can also create graphs right from the workspace. What do we want to look at first? Well, let's take a look at pump speed. So I'm going to select my two pumps, and I'm going to right click. And when I right click, I'm going to say generate transient junction graph. And let's look at the pump speed. And there it is. Now this is just a linear increase in speed, so not that exciting, but you'll get the picture. So this has both pumps in there, and they're right on top of each other. So I'm gonna click on this folder with the blue plus sign, and I'm gonna call this pump speed. Next thing I'm gonna do is let's take a look at how the pressures change at this particular valve. So I could right click and I can do a valve junction graph for the CV versus time if I want, but instead I'm gonna do a transient graph for the immediately upstream and downstream connected pipes. So I'm gonna do stagnation pressure. So here's how my pressure changes at that particular valve. So I'm gonna call this valve inlet and outlet pressure. Last but not least, what I want to do is I want to see how the pressure and flow rate changes through a particular flow path. So that's my flow path that I'm going to use. So I'm going to go to graph results, and this time I'm going to click on the green plus sign down here to create another graph tab, and I'm going to do my supply tank to take 1. And I'm going to do a stacked graph this time. So I'm going to look at pressure on the top and volumetric flow rate on the bottom. And then I'm going to click on this blue square. And I'm going to file this away. It's called profile pressure and flow. Now I'm going to rearrange this a little bit. I'm going to move this up. There we go. Here's why this is so amazing. And this is why it completely revolutionizes the way that you'll evaluate your Waterhammer results. Is because I can right click on this folder. If I want to regenerate any of these graph items, just double click. It's as easy as that. Or you can right click on the folder itself and say load folder items in the same tab. This is amazing. You're going to love this. I think it's super cool. So here, I'm displaying 3 different graphs at the same time. Pressure and flow, my pump speed, and the pressure at the valve. This is just amazing because there's no other ways that you can do all of these graphs at the same time. AFT Impulse is the only thing that does this. Excel won't even do this. And so what we're watching here is the animation for how pressure builds in your system as your pumps come up to speed, and then you can see how the flow rate starts to change, and at the same time you can see the red time ticker moving along, and that shows you how the pump is changing as well as the pressure in the valve. And this makes it so much easier to be able to evaluate your results. This is one of the biggest things that you have to know to evaluate your Waterhammer results effectively. It's all about the graphing. And using that graph guide will help you start slow and then work your way up to doing more advanced types of graphs just like this. So this is really important to get to know how to use, and spending the time to use that graph guide will help you, and this will be a game changer. Incidentally, you can also record these animation type graphs as MP4 files. That way you can include them as a report, or you can embed them with your PowerPoint, different things like that. So you can record this and put in your reports just the same, because that's where all the magic happens, is in the animations themselves. All right, what are we talking about next here? Visual report animation. So this is where you can get a better conceptual understanding of how things are changing in your system with colors. So for this same system here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the visual report window. And this is where the visual report window is actually really helpful. I'm going to click on the eyeball. That's the visual report control. And what you would need to do is you would need to click on animate. Okay. When you click on animate, you can specify how you want to animate your colors, and I want to animate the pressure in the system. And so there are some different things that you can configure here. Essentially, what you're trying to get to is something that looks like this. So here I've got blue being low pressures, red being high pressures. So they're all blue because my flow paths are closed and I have no flow in the system initially. So when I play the animation, my pumps are going to start up and my pumps are going to start to build pressure. So as you can see here, the colors are starting to change. They're starting to transition from that dark blue color to the light blue, and now they're light green. And then they'll start to become red as the pressure builds up even further and further. Now, for this particular system, this is not really all that exciting because this is just simply showing how the pressure builds in your system when you're doing a pump startup scenario. However, when you're doing something more complicated, let's say that you originally had everything running in your scenario and what you're modeling is a valve closure. Well, if you're closing this valve, that's where you'll start to see the sudden pressure surges bouncing through the system, and watching them reflect and superimpose on each other is really, really useful with the new visual report animation capability. So that's how you can use that. Gives you a really good conceptual understanding of how things are changing in your system. All right, a couple more things here. If I was in this particular model to go to the output window, you can see that you have some warning messages. The first thing about warning messages is you should actually read the message. If you read the message, it'll tell you what it's trying to tell you. You can then select the warning message, and just like it says right here, hit the F1 button on your keyboard. That'll bring up the Impulse help file, and you could read a more detailed discussion of what that warning message means. So in this particular model for this pump startup system, we've got big, scary red warning messages galore. And this looks really, really scary if you don't read it. The thing is, you got to read it to know what it means. So what this is telling you is that initially you have no flow in your system. When you initially have no flow or very little flow in your system, what are your steady state friction factors going to be? Well, if you look at a Moody diagram, your steady state friction factors based on very, very low Reynolds numbers are going to be really high. Well, really, they may not be that high, but they'll be higher than if you're in your turbulent flow regime. So what those warning messages are telling you here is that for this pump startup scenario, my steady state friction factor is a certain value based upon extremely low Reynolds numbers. What this is meaning is that you should turn on variable pipe resistance. That way, once the transient begins and your flow actually starts to pass through your system, well, in reality, your Reynolds numbers would change, so would your friction factors, and you would eventually become turbulent flow. That's where you would want to use variable resistance because it will allow your friction factor to change during the transient simulation. That way, it doesn't just use the larger steady state friction factor through the whole calculation process. So where do you go to turn on the variable pipe resistance? It's in the analysis and then transient control. And then it's this checkbox right here. All you need to do is just check that box to turn it on. Now, when you do that, if you are enabling variable pipe resistance, it will increase your runtime by about a factor of 3. Okay, so it will have a potentially significant impact on your model runtime. But now we don't have any warning messages anymore that are scaring us. So that's good. But here's the thing. Do you really need to use variable resistance all the time? Well, cases where that's important is like this, where if you have no flow initially in your system, or maybe you have parts of your system that are initially closed off to flow, and then later in your analysis, you're allowing them to open up. This is where you'd want your friction factors to be able to change. That way, Impulse will capture that changing friction factor over time properly. However, it's in very rare, very rare, or it's rare circumstances where that will play a major impact on your results. A lot of times, it makes hardly any impact at all. So even for a system like this, where it's telling me to enable variable resistance, if you compared the results from this scenario to a scenario where you're turning off the variable resistance, your results very likely might be exactly the same or very, very close. So really, you just have to do your own little self-study for your system to see if using variable resistance is actually going to impact your Reynolds numbers and your results or not. I wrote a really useful blog on this, when you should use variable resistance, and it uses this exact example. And I actually do that comparison for you, and I show you how the results are virtually identical. So even when turning on variable resistance when you should, like a system like this, it may not impact things that much. So this is just another tool in the tool bag to know, because you would see all these big scary warning messages and you're scanning things fast and you just see, oh, turn on variable resistance, and you turn it on, but all you're doing maybe is just adding more runtime for no reason. So you have to pay attention to when it's needed and when it's not. All right, hang in there with me. Just a couple more quick topics here. Detailed T's versus simple T's. So in this particular system, I have a T junction that I'm using. And when you use the detailed T loss model, this will account for pressure losses through that T. Now for steady state, like with Fathom, that's perfectly fine. But you have to make sure you get the orientation and the angle correct. If you don't get the orientation correct with appropriately defining your branch pipe, then your results are going to be wrong. B, it could cause convergence issues. And then C, when you take that into a Waterhammer situation, it can really start to skew your results. What's happening is we're using very complicated correlations that were developed by Idlechick, and they're really big, long, nasty equations for the detailed T calculations. And as your flow distribution through your Waterhammer event is changing, your potential correlations for your detailed T calculations could also be changing. And so the changes in correlations that it would be switching could potentially cause mathematical anomalies that may not be realistic. So if you're going to use detailed T's, A, be sure that you have all of this information defined exactly correct. B, you might run into some difficulties. So if you run into some difficulties or you start to see some odd mathematical anomalies, then just do this. Go to the optional tab, and for transient K factor, click on this drop-down menu, and that can give you some additional options. One of the simplest options that we recommend is to keep steady state values. What this will do is it'll run the model in steady state, and it'll calculate whatever the K factors are for that circumstance, and then it'll use those same K factors throughout the transient simulation. So it's a really good way to still account for some losses, but if you're allowing that transient K factor change from every single time step to time step, then that can definitely cause some difficulties and potentially odd results. So that's just something that you'll have to look at. But using either simple T's or keeping the steady state values, that is a very appropriate method to use when you're doing a Waterhammer analysis. Last but not least, duplicate special and scenario manager. So this is what I did for this example where I was trying the different valve closures for each of these cases. Because this is a super simple system, and the only thing I'm doing is changing the valve closure time frame, I simply selected the first top system right here, and then I went to the edit menu and clicked on duplicate special. I offset the numbers by 100. That way I could see that valve 3 corresponds with valve 103 and valve 203 and 303. So for a simple system like this where you don't have a lot going on, using the duplicate special method is a really good way of being able to easily and quickly compare different operating cases on the same workspace. However, there are other cases where things might get to be more complex, and that's where you would want to use the scenario manager. And the scenario manager is one of the most powerful tools of the software. It allows you to model all of your different operating cases within a single model, and there's intelligence built in so that if you make a change at a parent scenario, it will pass those changes down to all the child scenarios as well. Now, I'm not going to go through any further details on the scenario manager and duplicate special, but I wrote a few blogs that talks about each of these capabilities in some excellent detail. So be sure to read the blogs on duplicate special. The first scenario manager blog, that goes through a good overview of what the scenario manager is and how to use it. The second blog article right here on the scenario manager gives you a practical example of how you can use a scenario manager effectively, essentially where I modeled 12 different runs in less than 10 minutes. And I've also demonstrated that in previous webinars. But if you read those blogs, it'll give you a lot more detail about the duplicate special and the scenario manager feature. And now you at least know where it is and that they exist. And this is where you can find more information. All right, well, I know that I went a little bit further today, but a lot of you hung in there with me, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much for all your time. If you want to see what some of our other software products are available, the very last slide in the handout contains links to each of the different products, as well as their associated add-on modules that will greatly expand the functionality as well as capabilities of each of the software products. And then the last couple of slides are just kind of in education on what the software does. So thank you all very much for your time today. I appreciate you listening in. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. You can feel free to contact me, Ben Keyser at AFT.com, and I'll be glad to help, and so will all of the rest of us here at AFT. Thank you, everyone. Take care and have a wonderful rest of your week.